que cumplen la clara misión de decirle al conjunto del pueblo que han tomado ya su decisión. No habrá vallas, ni ríos, ni puertas que el obrero no pueda cruzar, conducidos por una vanguardia que los lleve al poder popular. Trabajadores al poder, 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 trabajadores al poder. Desde el fondo del pueblo ha surgido una voz de justicia social.
Workers to Power from Paradigm Records, Chile, Songs for the Resistance. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
We begin today's show with our ongoing coverage of events marking the 50th anniversary of the other September 11th. That's September 11th, 1973, when the U.S.-backed military coup in Chile unfolded that ousted the democratically elected president, Salvador Allende. He died in the palace that day, and led to a 17-year repressive dictatorship of General Augusto Pinochet. On Saturday, the Chilean president, Gabriel Boric, made a historic trip to Washington, D.C. to visit the site where on September 21st, 1976, agents of the Pinochet regime assassinated former Chilean diplomat Orlando Letelier and his colleague Ronnie Moffat of the Institute for Policy Studies for their work to defend democracy in Chile. Letelier had served as Chile's Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Interior and Defense Minister under Salvador Allende. At the time he was murdered, he was director of the Transnational Institute at IPS, a progressive think tank. This is the late filmmaker and author Saul Landau in a video produced by IPS describing the attack and his close friend, Orlando Letelier.
We wanted to work, of course, to bring democracy back to Chile and on human rights in general. And both Mark Raskin and Dick Barnett, who were the co-directors of IPS, thought it was a good idea. And we hired him. He didn't stay all that long because Pinochet blamed him for several of the bad things that were happening to Chile as a result of Pinochet's human rights violations. The Kennedy Amendment, which cut off all arms sales and shipments to Chile, and then the Harkin Amendment, which cut off all the rest except for humanitarian aid. And although Orlando was not responsible for either one of these, Pinochet in his narrow-shaped brain, of course, blamed him. And he ordered the head of the secret police, Manuel Contreras, who was a colonel, to do the job. Contreras, in turn, picked Michael Townley to organize the mission. Nobody who was ever involved with these two people will or could ever forget this horrible day. It was, I remember, a warm, slightly drizzly morning. Orlando's car came to rest just here at the embassy doorstep. Townley had put the bomb at a place in the I-beam where the bomb would blow straight up. Ronnie was sitting in the seat next to him and just took a piece of metal in the throat, and that wiped her out. I just felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow and sadness, but I also felt that we have got to get the people who did this. And there was no question in my mind that the only possible suspect was named Augusto Pinochet. But Pinochet never got his name on that indictment with the signature of the U.S. attorney. And that was a tragic blow to American justice.
That was Saul Landau in a film produced by the Institute for Policy Studies, IPS, where Orlando Letelier was working when he was assassinated. The IPS was co-founded by Marcus Raskin, father of Democratic Congress member from Maryland, Jamie Raskin, who addressed the memorial ceremony Saturday at the site of the 1976 assassination in Sheridan Circle in D.C. The event took place a couple of days after independent Senator Bernie Sanders joined Democratic Congress members Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and others to introduce a congressional resolution apologizing for the U.S. role in the 1973 coup and calling for further declassification of U.S. U.S. records for related events. Congressmember Raskin spoke after he presented a copy of the resolution to Chilean President Boric.
I was 13 years old when Orlando and Ronnie were killed right here. And I had a message that came to school saying that I should come right home after school. And I was on the bus coming just, around Sheridan Circle. And we were stuck for several hours in traffic because it was still a crime scene at that point, and none of us knew what had happened and what was going on. It was before cell phones took place. But I remember going to see Michael Moffat that night with my parents and with the Barnetts, and I remember Michael reconstructing the details of what had taken place and describing the horror of the explosion in the car. I remember everybody just weeping and not sleeping for days at the loss of Orlando, who everybody loved, and Ronnie, who everybody loved, who often babysat for me and for my siblings. And I remember my dad, and I remember Dick Burnett and Saul Landau and the other fellows holding a press conference and declaring that whatever else would happen, IPS would find the killers of their colleagues and see that justice was done.
That's Congressmember Jamie Raskin, who was also referring to Michael Moffat, who was the husband in the car, though not killed along with Ronnie Moffat and Orlando Letelier. Also there Saturday with two of Orlando Letelier's sons, including Juan Pablo Letelier, a former member of the Chilean Senate, who will join us in a minute from Santiago. This is what he said Saturday.
Dear friends, this is a site of cultural memory. This is a memory site that has been built during the last 47 years, led by the IPS. This has been a place where the Letelier Moffat Fund, where fabulous voices have built a memory site. Hands, struggles, who have built what is here today. We as a family are full of gratitude.
After Orlando Letelier's son spoke on Saturday, the Chilean president, Gabriel Boric, addressed the crowd. He began in English.
I have been to a lot of acts of remembrance, and I must confess I'm really shaking now after hearing Orlando's sons, after hearing that incredible speech, Jamie Raskin, wherever you are. Oh, there you are. After feeling this energy here, the Washington crying, but all of us here gathered happy and celebrating life, not death. That's an unequivocal way to say that we won. That Orlando's and Ronnie's ideals won. And we are very proud of that. And my generation, I was born 10 years after Orlando was killed. My generation is deeply moved and deeply grateful of the thought they gave, of the life they gave to us.
As Chilean President Gabriel Boric continued his address, he transitioned to Spanish.
Que los golpes de Estado nunca son inevitables.
Coup d'etats are never inevitable. There will always be a space for dialogue, for conversation, for respect of different opinions.
Respeto entre quienes piensan distinto. Y hasta el día de hoy,
even today, there are many who continue with impunity. And when some people dare to ask the victims to silence their grief, to turn the page, I would humbly like to tell them, having spoken to many of those victims, that this reconciliation is only possible with truth and justice, not with forgetting, and with the profound agreement and deep conviction that this can never happen again.
We really expect that the U.S. has a reflection, a more deep reflection, and I know that you are doing that, but there's a more deeper reflection on what they pushed in Chile, and not only in Chile, in other places in Latin America.
That was Chilean President Gabriel Boric speaking Saturday in Washington, D.C. at the site of Orlando Letelier and Ronnie Moffat's assassination. For more, we're joined by Juan Pablo Letelier, member of the Chilean House and Senate for 32 years, was in high school when his father, Orlando Letelier, was assassinated with U.S. activist Ronnie Moffat in that car bombing on Embassy Row, September 21st, 1976. Letelier's Socialist Party is also part of President Boric's coalition. Joining us now from Santiago, Chile. Still, after all of these years, our condolences to you, your family, your country, Juan Pablo Letelier.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me.
It's great to have you with us. If you can talk about, we heard Congressman Raskin talking about him being 13 years old when your dad was assassinated. Can you talk about your experience at that time? Your father was the Chilean ambassador to the United States until 1973, then moved on to be leading critic outside Chile of Augusto Pinochet before he was murdered. Talk about where you were.
I was at high school. We used to live in Bethesda, Maryland. Went to Walt Whitman High School. I was a senior. I was called over to the dean's office or to the principal's office. And when I got there, he mentioned to me that my father had been in an accident. He didn't give me more details. He only mentioned that my aunt was going to come by to pick me up. A little while after she did, two of my brothers were in the car with her. I got in the car, sat in the back seat with one of my brothers, Francisco, who asked me if I knew what had happened. And I told him that I did not. And he simply said, they put a bomb in Dad's car. They put a bomb in Dad's car. We drove down into D.C. to George Washington Hospital. We were listening to news, briefs, reports of all types, different information, confusing information. One person dead, two persons dead, no information. When we got to the hospital, there was a lot of people, a lot of press, a lot of confusion. We were kind of hustled in, and suddenly we were in a room with my mother. She came to us. She hugged the three of us that were there. And what she said was, the only thing I ask of all of you is that after all this is over, you won't hate anybody. That was her way of telling us that my father was dead.
And Juan Pablo Letelier, could you talk about the fight afterwards to justice for the people responsible, and especially the long quest to hold Pinochet directly responsible?
This has been a very long fight. The Institute for Policy Studies, Saul Landau, along with a journalist, John Dingus, did a big investigation. They searched for information. They picked up information. The FBI also did its effort. There was a trial initially in the U.S. around 78, I will say, which unfortunately, despite all the information being available, it was considered a mistrial, amazingly, where the Cubans who lived in the U.S., who collaborated with Pinochet's police or secret police with the DINA, they were off the hook, unfortunately. They have been identified. This was a big effort through many years. Many human rights workers kept struggling to get justice done. Finally, I'd say thanks to many people who